You're about to discover the 6 best vacation alternatives when you can't or don't want to go cruising, including what lets you pack and unpack just once, the things that incorporate the best parts of cruising without the worst, and 1 or 2 rather unusual ones that I think cruisers will like. I'm Gary Bembridge, and I've been taking a look at what we can do when we can't or don't want to go cruising. I asked people on my channel about their plans for cruising, and surprisingly, 2/3 of people are not sure if they are going to go cruising for some period of time. So we're all looking for alternatives to cruising vacations. So I've taken a look at what I think the 6 very best alternatives for us who love cruising are. Of course, cruising is all about being on the water. So are there any alternatives that are open to us that involve going on the water? There are actually 3 quite exciting alternatives. First of all, river cruising. So when we talk about cruising, most of us think about ocean cruising, but river cruising is operating. Certainly across Europe, there are a multitude of rivers you can cruise on, whether that's the Douro in Portugal, the Rhine, the Danube, and all the rivers are opening up. So you can go river cruising quite extensively in Europe. Of course, if you're traveling from the US or Australia, we do need travel restrictions to be lifted before you can do that. However, if you are in the United States, you can also go river cruising as that starts to open up. It's opening up particularly in the Mississippi, but there are cruises right down in Florida you can go, and also in the East Coast inland where you can cruise all the way from Jacksonville right up to Baltimore. So river cruising is definitely an option to take a look at. Secondly, if you are in Europe, particularly in the UK, in France or in Holland, or you have access to those countries, barge cruising is opening up. So in the UK you have the narrow barges, but certainly in places like France you have those great barges, one of which I went on last year with Crossy Europe, where we cruised in this magnificent barge which holds up to 16 people. So barging is a big opportunity. European Waterways has opened up where they offer the chance to actually charter entire barges yourself. So 6 or 8 of you can go as a family unit off barging if you're worried about mixing with other people. Cruising on lakes is also a great opportunity. This is particularly relevant if you're in the United States, where there are some amazing cruises around the Great Lakes which are opening up. Take a look at Victory Cruise Lines because they offer a myriad of lake cruising options. One of the great things about cruising, of course, is you can unpack and pack just once. So what are our alternatives here? There's one really big one that is taking off enormously, and that's traveling by RV or by caravan. I read some data the other day that the sale and hire of RVs, those mobile motorhomes, has grown by over 180% in the US, and we're seeing the whole explosion around Europe of both RVs and caravans. The great thing about that is, of course, you have effectively a cabin like you'd have on a cruise ship. You can move around different ports without packing and unpacking. Obviously, there's a bit of setup. The great news about those is also you can travel as a family unit. The actual caravan parks or RV parks already are socially distancing because you have a little patch of ground, but also it's a very social activity. So you'll find there's lots of people being very friendly. So a lot of those things that you get on cruising with the sense of community and being together. So it captures all the good things about cruising, the ability to move around, see different places, with unpacking and packing just the one time. A group of friends of mine just last year actually hired an RV and traveled the whole way across Canada over a couple of weeks. So this shows you that you can really have a fantastic time doing an RV vacation and recreate a lot of the things that you have with cruising. The third thing that cruising does, of course, is cruising is a kind of a curated travel experience. The itineraries are chosen, you're given a range of activities to do, your accommodation is all organized, you don't have to worry about dining because that's all laid on. So what is the best alternative for that? A really great alternative, and something that I've done a number of times, is to actually go on an escorted tour. Now there's 2 different ways you can do that. One of the ones which is the most classic one is a bus escorted tour. So I've been on escorted tours with companies like Titan Travel, for example, out of the UK. I've also done some with Latin routes, but you can also do those domestically if you don't want to travel internationally and across borders. The great advantage of a escorted tour is you have a tour guide and a driver. The whole itinerary is laid out, the excursions are included, they've normally sorted out all your dining options, you'll find that accommodation is all sorted, so you basically can sit back, go with the flow, and pretty much like on cruising, you don't have to make many decisions. Another alternative, which is one that really appeals to me enormously, is you can also do that by train. So there are companies, for example, Great Rail Journeys, where they organize a huge wide range of escorted tours, but using trains instead of buses. So for example, you can travel the whole way across the United States using a combination of different trains. You can travel around the UK, Europe, wherever. So again, it's the same approach. You have a tour guide, all your accommodations organized, all your excursions organized, everything's bundled in as a cost. So definitely take a look at escorted tour options, whether it's internationally or even domestically. Definitely a fantastic alternative. I've had some brilliant times on escorted bus and train journeys. For me, another one of the appealing things about cruising is the sense that you're traveling on these magnificent and significant forms of transportation. So of course it could be as exotic as something like the Queen Mary 2, which is a big classic and the only liner in the world where you can whisk between the UK and the US on their classic transatlantics. But it might also be that you want to go on a really modern and new ship, like the whole Celebrity Apex, Celebrity Edge ships, or the certain ships that you just really like, or you enjoy the big massive resort ships that you would have on Royal Caribbean or Norwegian or whatever it is. But it's around the ship itself, the transportation. And of course there are also some amazing things you can do when you can't go cruising. A lot of those I would also recommend you focus looking at trains. There are some phenomenal train journeys, and certainly as a cruise lover I've been on some incredible train journeys. So for example, in Australia, going on the GAN all the way from Darwin right down to Adelaide through the centre, the red heart of Australia, going to places like Alice Springs. You can also do the Indian Pacific, where you go from Perth to Sydney. In Europe you've got, of course, the famous Orient Express. In South Africa, you've got Rovos Rail, which are these beautiful old carriages, Pullman carriages from the 30s, 40s and 50s, which have been recreated and restored. You have the Blue Train as well, another iconic trip. All around the world you have classic and famous trains. You have the Trans-Siberian Express through Russia. You have the Eastern Orient, which travels through Thailand. Of course, with international travel restrictions at this point in time, you may not want to do some of those exotic ones, but you may find close to you there are some classic and famous train journeys. So for example, in Canada, you have the magnificent Rocky Mountaineer, which is one of the most magnificent journeys that I've been on. Depending on the type of trip you choose, you're either going to have those where you sleep on the train, so you actually sleep across the whole time on things like the GAN, the Indian Pacific, Rovos Rail, Blue Train. You'll find on some other trains where you actually don't sleep on the train overnight. You actually get off the train and stay in hotels next to the station itself. So for example, on the Rocky Mountaineer, you travel on the train during the day, you get off in the evening to go and stay in a local hotel, get back on the train. And the same is also true often with many of the Royal Scotsman journeys through Scotland. So take a look at big, iconic forms of travel. One of the options you could have within this whole category is, bear in mind, there's a number of famous ships that have turned into hotels. So in Dubai, you can stay at the QE2, the old famous classic QE2, which has been turned into a hotel. In Holland, you have the absolute famous Rotterdam, which is one of their famous classic ships, which has been turned into a hotel. And of course, in the US, you have the original Queen Mary, which is down in Long Beach. So there is choice of actually staying on a ship, even though you're not heading out to sea. Another key aspect, for me anyway, when I go cruising, is the fact that whichever place you go to, there is a myriad of different things you can do, a wide range of excursions you can do. So you'll go to a specific port, a specific place, and you can go on activity excursions, you can go on cultural excursions, you can go and find out more about the culture, the food, whatever it is, whatever your interests are. And one of the things that I've certainly been doing a lot of, and doing in many weekends away, is finding places that are not that far to travel to and going for a kind of a city or a country or a destination break and effectively recreating that whole port kind of experience. What I've been doing and what I've found is I've been avoiding the big hotspots, so avoiding going to the beaches and places like that where there's going to be lots of people, and looking for hotels dotted around the country or locally that are doing deals. We'll find as hotels are opening up, you're going to find fantastic deals. So they normally include, you'll find often a dinner, a bed and breakfast rate. So similar to being on a cruise where you have your meals and accommodation included. But then what I'm doing is picking a place and then effectively building a range of excursions. So assuming it's almost like an overnight in a port. So for example, recently stayed near Oxford and did things like going to Blenheim Palace, went and explored the old castle and the prison on another excursion, went on a big cycling excursion all around down through the various canals and the waterways there, went out on a sort of explored the food and sort of went on a foodie excursion. So picking places heading off there, doing a kind of a combined dinner, bed and breakfast, and then building a series of excursions. A great thing about that is also you can help support the local economy close to the country you live or where you live. And also many of those tour operators which have lost international travelers are really excited when you go back and try and build excursions around the place that you're visiting. One of the big attractions for many people on cruising is the fact that they're going to a resort. So particularly if you're cruising on things like MSC cruises, some of their newer ships, or some of the big new Norwegian cruise line ships or Royal Caribbean ships, there is an enormous amount of resort type activities crammed onto those ships. So of course, one of the alternatives for vacations, if you like those, is looking for all-inclusive resort vacations. Now, I guess before the whole pandemic, Las Vegas was one of the big options. However, a lot of people are nervous about going to Las Vegas. So seek out and look for some of those more all-inclusive resort places. And there are many companies around the world that cater for those, whether it's traveling cross country, whether it's within your local country, but you'll find a resort all-inclusive is going to recreate many of those things. And the reason I say that is also, particularly if you've got kids, those resort venues have kids clubs. And so you can recreate one of the strongest things that I know many families like is you have a wide range of activities for everybody, but very importantly, you have kids clubs. While we can't cruise or don't want to cruise, of course, we still want to vacation until we head back to sea when we feel it's right for us. These are the alternatives to vacation that I've certainly been looking at whilst I can't cruise. Hopefully these gave you some inspiration and you found these really helpful. I'd love to hear what you think. Bear in mind, I have loads more videos packed full of advice and tips of all sorts of travel and cruising. So why don't you watch another one of those right now?